We've got a very interesting topic for today's video. I think this is one of those discussions that separates me from a lot of other people who cover video games if they're not also into game dev. And we're going to be discussing, is there such a thing as wrong game design? For our discussion, this is one of those topics where we need to drill down specifically what we're focusing on. We're not going to be talking about hard skills when it comes to game development, especially programming, because there is a bad way to program your game. If your game causes somebody's hard drive to break, then that's a pretty nasty bug. Likewise, we're not talking about standardized or foundational elements of genres when we discuss good or bad design. If you design a platformer where the asterisk button is used for jumping, the down button on your D-pad is for shooting in a first-person shooter, then yeah, that is a bad way of building your game. What we're focusing on for today is the gameplay loop itself, or the core mechanics and systems. Is there a right or wrong way of designing them in terms of building your experience, or what you want the player to experience in your game? And this is far more difficult and interesting to discuss. Now, one thing that drives me crazy is when I see other YouTubers and streamers talk about video games like, this game is stupid, the developers are lazy, they don't know how to build a game, so on and so forth. Game design, as I'm sure many of you are aware of watching this, is very tough. One of the developers I've spoken to, I think, put it best. It is the intersection of programming and entertainment when it comes to making a video game. And what that means is that there's a lot that goes on in terms of designing a game that most people outside of game dev will never understand or comprehend. And trying to build mechanics and systems and loops is a very tough process. And it's one that, even if you go into it with the best intentions and the best idea, doesn't mean you're going to have that when you walk out of it. And for a lot of people trying to learn design or build games in their first place or their first game, it can be tough to just figure out what you want your mechanics to be. And like I said, for our topic today regarding whether or not there is such a thing as such a thing as bad game design, obviously we know of plenty of examples of good ones. Building a game can be very tricky along those lines, because it's very hard for people to understand what makes a game good or bad. And we'll talk more about that in the second part of this video. But it's very important from a design standpoint, understanding design, that just because a game is released doesn't mean that is the perfect version of that game. Many times developers will release a title because that is the best solution they could come up with at that time, not the best solution for the issue or the design in general. Now, this leads to a very big misconception of games from the 90s or 80s and 90s, that for the longest time, people were always supporting or saying that those games were the golden age of gaming because there were no bugs back then, developers didn't have any issues, all the games were at least being perfect, and so on and so forth. And we've learned in recent years that that is a complete lie. As we've seen more the growth of speedrunning and looking at speedrunning culture, we've had a chance to examine classic games and realize they were very buggy as well. And again, this is not an attack or an insult on developers themselves. The reason why those games were a lot harder to kind of review or analyze back then were two reasons. One, we simply didn't have the technology or means of critically examining games back then. A lot of stuff that we've seen today has had to do with data mining and using task bots to run through these titles. And the second reason was that games were smaller back then, not just in terms of the size of the file, but in their depth. Imagine going back in time and telling a developer in 1989 about Red Dead Redemption 2. But because of the complexities of when it comes to game design, this is one of the reasons why you will never see me outright slam a developer. You're not going to find a podcast of me talking to a developer like, hey, that game you worked on for 2 to 3 years, here's what you did wrong with it, you stupid, lazy designer, how dare you make this game? And now my fans are probably laughing, wanting to come up with a way of me yelling at a designer on a upcoming cast. But again, when it comes to understanding game dev and game design, you have to realize that a lot of the elements that go into a game, sometimes the developer is just trying to get something to work, and other times they may know exactly what the game wants to be. Now, you're probably wondering why I'm using John Wick Hex as the example up there. And the reason is that I did a podcast interview with one of the designers on the team, and in that cast, which I think should be going up somewhat soon at the time of this posting, he was very forthcoming in talking about some of the limitations and issues that came up with the design. And he even flat out said there are some things he wished that they could have done better, or that there was another solution around them, because he felt that what was in the game didn't exactly come, 100% to their vision. I think this was in the form of the boss battles, as well as combining kind of the action and strategy design loops as well. But again, for a lot of people, you don't hear about these kinds of challenges when it comes to game design. That when you get a game like Cuphead, Call of Duty, Stardew Valley, you name it, that is a perfect game and the developer did everything right, and they're Game of the Year winners, and there's nothing wrong with this game whatsoever. But it's very important for game criticism to be able to look at games both positively and negatively. And it's very important from the design standpoint, as you're trying to understand what makes these games work and what makes them not work. Because like I've said, developers don't go into a project with the explicit intention of making a bad game. That's not how you exactly build a business anywhere. And when we see games that just don't work, it's very hard for a lot of people to understand why. They may say something is stupid, buggy, broken, developers are lazy once again, but very few people can drill down to what the actual issue is. And when you're trying to design a game around multiple gameplay loops and systems, like I said, you can run into that situation where the best solution is the one that works, not the one that magically fixes these problems. And we've seen developers in the past have to make do with these limitations, and in some cases, it can lead to surprising results. Two really good examples of this would be Silent Hill 2, that developers were limited by the PlayStation 2's engine in terms of rendering the background, so they created the now famous fog, and that became a series standout until they removed it with the remake. Another case would be Battle Brothers, that developers didn't have the budget to fully animate their characters moving around and be fully figured, so they used kind of like these little figurines on the board, and it gave the game a unique aesthetic and look to it. And again, you had a lot about game design is about coming up with inventive solutions to these problems, because every game's design is different, and there is no such thing as the one-size-fits-all for game design. Now, with that said, we're going to do our Patreon supporter and sponsor shout out now, and when we return, because I know a few of you are going to bring up these examples, we're going to talk about games that are designed in a way that we can argue that they are badly designed, but it's important to understand why there are issues to these games. And now for a quick thank you to our current Game Wisdom sponsors and Patreon supporters. And we'd like to continue the discussion on game design, be sure to check out our Discord channel, linked down below. In the last part, I talked about my thoughts about why it's very hard to say that design in of itself can be considered bad. But as we have certainly seen, there have been many games released that have kind of gone down that bad route. And stuff like Getting Over Bennett 5 here, we've kind of determined, or we've kind of like came to the conclusion that it's not a good video game. But again, this raises one of the hardest aspects to talk about. Why is a game bad if there is no such thing as bad design? And this is a topic, again, that is very multi-layered. And it is a tough thing to talk about when it comes to game design. As I said in the last part, that when you're trying to build a game, most developers are not coming at it with the explicit purpose of designing a bad title. But when a game fails because of its design or gameplay loop, there are always multiple elements to it that become a factor. And one of the more common elements, again, is the UI or onboarding. With something like Getting Over It over here, the gameplay itself, I will not say there's anything bad about it, but the control interface of using the mouse cursor to kind of control that little circle, it is very hard on your hands, and it's purposely made to be cumbersome. And again, that is not a rub or a dig at the gameplay loop of climbing the mountain and getting over it. And this is one of the things that you have to understand about design, that even though there is no such thing as bad design, you still need to understand what elements are driving people away from your game. Now, Getting Over It, Goat Simulator, and even something like Untitled Goose Game, these are titles that have a very explicit purpose in their design. And I've said this before about explicitly designed titles, that they're purposely meant to elicit a specific reaction or be played a certain way. But even with that said, though, you have to understand what that quality or the level quality means to the market itself. Like we've said, if you're trying to make a game that is marketable in 2019 or whenever you're watching this video, you can't abide by genre conventions and issues that we saw in games 20, 30 years ago. This is one of the big things that separates a lot of modern retro designers from one another. Those who slavishly claim or they climb or whatever the expression is to classic game conventions and issues, such as having infinitely spawned triggers and things like that. And the right where I was thinking of was cling there. It just came to me as I was watching my character fall. But the best examples will evolve that design and go in a different direction, because these gameplay loops can work. It just takes the eye and the mind of a great designer to get what works going and to ignore the issues that have plagued it. As a kind of a mini tangent, I've been playing a lot of like Bullfrog Simulator games such as 2 Point Hospital and Little Big Workshop. And both titles do very interesting things with that design. While they're not 100% perfect, they still did something differently and not just try and be the same exact games. So to begin to wrap things up for our video, game design in of itself, I don't feel it can be labeled good or bad, as in this is a bad gameplay loop. This is a gameplay loop that will guarantee your title sells 500,000 copies and stuff like that. It all comes back to that one magic word that I know a lot of developers are probably having in their heads right now: the implementation. That, at the end of the day, is what separates designers from one another. Why certain games become standout hits, and why similar examples don't work. Like I said in my piece about Monster Hunter, the growth and changes that Capcom made to Monster Hunter World compared to previous games were one of the many reasons why that game blew up compared to previous examples. Again, it's not the gameplay loop's fault that previous Monster Hunter games did not become massive successes, but in how it was implemented for the handheld devices. And as a designer, you always need to, again, pay attention to what kind of design you're working with and what are people doing in that genre. What are things that people like and they don't like? Again, this has been Blizzard's MO for over 20 years now, and it has led to them making some amazing games. Although, by the time you're watching this video, we're kind of running into like the anti-Blizzard period. But with that said, thank you for watching this video. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and come on back for daily discussions on game design here and on Game Wisdom, where I examine the art and science of games. Until next time, take care. If you're looking for more wisdom about game design, be sure to check out my latest offering of books, 20 Essential Games to Study, aimed for first-time developers and students looking for some inspiration for their upcoming games, and Game Design Deep Dive Platformers if you're interested in anything regarding 2D and 3D platforming design. They're both available in print, digital, and wherever books are being sold. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoy things, be sure to do all the liking and subscribing that the kids are doing these days. Check out our Discord channel link down below where we hang out and chat game design, and come back later tonight for our regular streamings. But that's it, and tune in for more great content here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games.